champion. Also, 4-time Mr. He is an incredibly podcast now called the Cutler Cast, which you guys can subscribe to on Apple Podcasts or on the legend Jay Cutler. How you doing today?
Great to be on.
It is great to be on, man. I bumped into you at a party. I had been trying to get you on the podcast. You come up to me and hey man, I love your podcast. I said it, but in my mind I thought, shut the fuck. And then I was like, dude, you want to come on? He's like, yeah. And I was like, man, come on, you got to come on.
Yeah, man. And it's, because of course I had known about you from all the days at the pool events.
Yeah.
Everything was just very smooth. I liked it. So
yeah.
A lot of cool guests, and the women aren't bad.
Yeah, you're doing it. I'm trying to do that. All right, beautiful, man. So here's the thing. I didn't realize, I watched probably 8 hours of your stuff in the last couple days. Growing up with 6 siblings, growing up in Massachusetts, and growing up on a farm, I looked at, I saw your dad in one of the features that you did. Did you have any other athletes in the family that were just, you mentioned being able to bench press 315 in high school without lifting weights?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. My brothers, I have 3 older brothers, 3 older sisters. I'm the youngest of 7. So what was unique about my family is, we're all like really hard workers growing up on the farm, and my brothers got into concrete when I was 11. Others were all athletes, but the thing is, most of them didn't graduate high school, a lot of my siblings, because at the time they chose to go to work at a younger age. And, my parents were separated when I was really young. So my brothers and sisters really kind of, became my role models for, for life and everything that I did. So, growing up with a 10-year age gap, and, they were, taking that. And my mom had moved to Florida, and, my brothers were provide for the family in that sense.
Were there any other freak athletes in the family? Anybody play college ball or anything?
No one, like I said, no one really graduated.
They didn't go to college.
I was the only one. My sister and I, who are a year apart, today is actually, we're the only ones that actually went to college. And my college didn't have football, and I was a football player. I was a track athlete, and I found bodybuilding at 18. But my brothers had great physiques, and I always kind of laughed because my dad's like 5'3" and 135 pounds at the time. So
that is what I noticed, man, when he's standing next to you, and I was just like, we talk about genetics a lot on this podcast, and
yeah, I think it comes from my mom's side.
Yeah.
So I had a pretty good structure, and if you look at building, structure means a great deal.
Yeah.
How someone's shoulder width is, and how the taper can be, and the ability to put on a lot of muscle mass. I was always an athlete, just from the time I was I was 4 years old, 7 years, 12 years old, and I took an interest in bodybuilding at 12. I started picking up books. And in high school, like I said, I just toyed with weights a little bit, but I started reading books at GNC when I was, and then I made I'm going to start bodybuilding on my 18th birthday, which was August 3rd, 1973, and I joined the gym, local Gold's Gym, and I've never looked back.
So I get the thing you talk about discovering bodybuilding. You saw a picture of Chris Dickerson, and then that you saw that body type and you knew that's what you wanted. But here's the thing: high school football, and we always remember the first guy who could bench 3 dunk a basketball in your high school. You're benching 315 without lifting weights in high school. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, listen, it may not be as much weight today, right? I think that 315 back. I went to a regional high school, and this kids, and even when I was a sophomore and junior, I was just the strongest kid. So when I got under the bench press and just, pushed out weights, it was just easy for me to do. And I'd be 180 then. I graduated high school at 200, so.
That's still impressive.
Yeah.
Because after not lifting any weights and then being able to throw that up, that's
so
crazy.
we went to like high school competitions for football. They would have like a like kind of a powerlifting thing. We'd squat and deadlift and bench press, and I was always like the guy that could do the most at all these competitions.
And you played defensive tackle and running back.
I played defensive tackle and running back. Yeah, I was fullback.
Did you ever consider like a college? Phil talked to me about playing University of Denver, and then Ronnie Coleman, Grambling State.
Yes.
Did you ever think about a college football career?
To be honest, I wasn't huge on the team sports.
Okay.
And that kind of, we can get into that a little bit with the mindset of being a bodybuilder, because you become very individual. And I really how I got into weight training, because when you can implant yourself in the gym and you can get in that zone and separate yourself from all things that kind of pull us away. And that's what I found best about training, was the therapy. Like, that's what I was great at. And I was individual with everything that I did. Not to say bodybuilding is strictly like, yeah, you're in the gym pushing your things on the outside. There's a lot of variables that make you successful.
Yeah. It seems like a meditation for you, because you mentioned you mentioned lifting without using headphones. And I know maybe back, 20, 30 years ago, that wasn't a big deal. Now you just don't see that. And you leave your phone in the car, which is another thing that they're doing it for the gram. You leave your phone in the car, and then you're lifting without headphones, and there's like a focus that you have that I think is lost on a lot of other people.
Yeah, I mean, back in the day before social media existed, there was no phones allowed training around me. To this day, even now, like when I go train currently, if I'm training with someone, put my phone away, but they'll have a phone, or even people around me. The criminal justice to get away from the family saying, okay, well, you're not doing anything, you take over the business.
So you don't have to go in a concrete.
Yeah, so truthfully, that's why I went to college. Degree, I did 2 years, and at the time when I graduated, with that 2 years, I won the team, me the best teenager in the country at 19. I was just about 20. My birthday's in August each year, and I think I won in June, the teen nationals. So I was just about to turn 20, and I was able to become the best teenager in the country after 2 years of training. Like, that's crazy.
Do you consider doing maximum security guard and maximum security after your degree in criminal justice?
that's what people did. I mean, whether it was, I applied, I didn't get the job. I think the goal was really police officer, really.
Okay.
In the end.
I just being the strongest, one of the security
I think
guards.
that's why I chose that career too, because I was already developed. I mean, when I joined I already had a decent physique, but 50 pounds like the first 6 months of training. So I knew I had something different. And people would come up to me in the gym, and it's funny because I was that kid joining the gym on August 3rd, and by February of the next year, people were coming up to me saying, "Hey, bigger, you know, how do you do this? How do you do that?" I joined the gym. I just knew from the books, but having hands-on experience is a lot different from the books.
So I think obviously the most impressive thing is the weight training, the bench press 500 pounds. Listen to Ronnie Coleman talk about 850, all that kind of stuff. That's impressive. Though, man, the way you guys at the thermodynamic level, like the number, the reading from all the things I've read about you, the eating is probably one of the most important things. Buying 140 pounds of chicken at one time and buying an entire cow.
Yeah, I bought a cow from the butcher. I was living in a place called Spencer, Massachusetts, and I had a local butcher there, so I'd actually buy all the meat, and I would have 2 freezers. So what I would do is I'd buy, the chicken, and I would break it all down into like 2-pound bags, and I would freeze it. And then I would have the cow where I would take in like the butcher place, and I would say I want this as steak. I would do the same thing. I'd put it in like 2-pound, and then each day I would take out like some chicken, which all I ate, and besides eggs. So when I had the eggs, I was down, and I bought 30 dozen eggs at a time.
Because you do 20 at a time in the
20
morning.
egg whites, yeah.
20 egg. This is incredibly, because a lot of people look at it and they're like, oh, you mentioned this on the Greg Doucette podcast, where it's like twice as much gear, I'll get twice as strong. That's not the case. The food you eat is freaking incredible.
The food is everything.
Yeah.
Even to this day, like, I've retired now, and, I competed for 8 years, and I weigh about 230.
Yeah.
But when this was all going on, I was 270. I mean, even at 20 years old, I was 270. So the food, I was eating 6-7 times a day. I was eating upwards to 4 pounds of meat a day pretty consistently. And, it was just every 2 hours like clockwork.
Your GI tract is incredible. It's probably the most impressive part of this whole thing.
The thing is that I think like we talk about genetics, and, it definitely, I spent a lot of time in the toilet. Let's put it that way, man,
Okay, so 20. You would do 20 whole eggs more than once a day. I guess what I'm at. You mentioned before you eat 7 times a day. You're only hungry for 2 of them. What is the mental thing you're going through to get this food down, man?
Mr. Olympia.
Yeah,
Mr. Olympia. Like, you looked at guys like Yates.
Yeah.
Ronnie Coleman eventually became my rival, right? And there's so many greats. You looked at all the former Lee Haney, who was before Yates, and I mentioned Chris Dickerson when I first started, and of course Schwarzenegger, right? He won 7.
Yeah.
But all you think about is, like, what the books tell you. Magazines told me you have to eat to grow, and I think that's really what drove me. I wanted to be successful.
Yeah.
And I wanted to succeed, like build the ultimate physique. What people don't realize is, like, bodybuilders are more like artists, right?
Yeah.
So we look in the mirror. We use the mirrors to judge how our training is and when we're trying to develop body parts. And I always judge my workouts by how great the pump was.
Yeah.
And you heard Arnold talk about in pumping iron, like the pump and everything. So, of course, you try to get as much expansion of the muscle as you can, but then you realize you have to feed it in order to, get those fibers to repair and, of course, get the volume of the muscles.
I read in Schwarzenegger's biography, there was one time where he continued to eat steak until he weighed 275. He was not going to stop. Like within the course of a day or two, he's like, I'm going to continue to eat until this thing happened. It was just crazy.
Yeah. And listen, their diet's on way more scientific now. They were drinking whole milk and like eating a lot more dairy products then. They didn't have the science or the knowledge that we have.
Pretty incredible, man. Like some of those stories, again, the 20 whole eggs, the entire cow, the 140 pounds of chicken, and then you're constantly eating whenever you're doing this stuff. And you even mentioned before, it's like, even when you come to do a podcast, like, I got to make sure that I got to eat beforehand just so I can make it through this.
Yeah,
this period.
it was 2 hours, so it was a clock. And you mentioned, how hungry were you? I would, I always said I would eat at least 3 meals hungry wise. But it seemed like, as the metabolism got bigger, when you build more muscle, you need more fuel.
Yeah.
And that's really what kept me driving to, of course, the food got more and more as my body weight climbed, and eventually that body weight was maximum 310. I competed closer to 260, but, that would be a phase I'd go through for 20 weeks to rip down and get down to body fat and be able to compete with the best.
I can just still see you like a 290-pound fullback. What's the fullback for the Ravens? He's 300. You know what I'm saying? He's 5'10", 300. And I thought, like, that'd be a real interesting thing. So 19, you end up winning that championship, the team nationals. At that point, there's a couple other stories I think they're incredible. The one about you squat till your nose bleeds. That is, could you explain that? Because listen, man, I've squat pretty hard, but not till my nose bleeds.
Yeah, so we had this squat rack at this Gold's Gym. It's in Worcester, Massachusetts, and there was this mirror in front of the squat rack, and basically the whole mirror was like either spit or
blood.
We would squat until we thought it was the coolest thing ever. When you put 500 pounds on there and you're forcing reps out, remember, I had only been training like less than 2 years. So we would squat, and if your nose didn't bleed, you weren't doing it proper.
Jesus, man.
It was crazy.
That is crazy, man. Your nose is bleeding. I just can't even
And my legs were my strong point. So when I first started training, I actually had to back down my leg training.
You said 3 years you didn't work on your legs so that your upper body would catch up.
And that was, even football. I remember even in high school having trouble fitting jeans in my thighs just because of the shape. And once I started training, those thighs developed. I had such a quad sweep, and that's usually the hardest body part to build.
Yeah.
Squatted 700 at 19. And, it was just genetically a gift for me. And I've been known as, one of the best bodybuilder legs of all time.
Yeah. These are crazy numbers. Maybe you don't appreciate them, but you understand less than 1/10 of the 1/100 of the population will ever bench press 500 pounds.
Yeah.
Right. And then you were able to do when
550 for two is what my max was.
When were you able to bench 550?
This was my early 20s, because then I got a little smarter. Shit, I have a career. I need to be careful with train. Because remember, bodybuilding, like we're sitting here talking about these stats, but it's all illusion, right? So like I mentioned, as being an artist, and we're judged on our symmetry, proportions, muscularity, definition. So they don't gauge how much to get there squatted, right? And, we talk about the Ronnie Coleman, his biggest regret is
850.
Yeah, well, I think he did 2 reps under.
And he said it's easy, and he wished that he had done more.
Yeah.
That it was listening to that is just crazy.
Yeah, and so for us, I needed harder to have more of a career. Bodybuilding, the running back position in football, you're very limited. Like, you're not supposed to being at the top. It's just that there's certain athletes that can healthy. I was fortunate to was able to be top 2 in the world for 12 years.
Is the degeneration of joints, or is it because anabolics? Like, what the thing that
I just think that the drive, physique starts to happen, injuries. Because we're talking and bragging about these weights. Without those weights, I feel you can't get certain proportions. Yeah. Phil Heath he's probably one of the most genetically gifted guys. He came after me, but he still trained heavy and hard, and he stayed injury free for most of his career. I ended up with a bicep tear at the very end, but I was able to maintain very healthy, performance through that whole career.
The 2011 years when you had the bicep tear, the first time Phil Heath won. What did you know? I never heard you specifically talk about what happened.
What happened is I did what I did my whole career since I started. So I was doing dumbbell presses. So I basically had the dumbbells like you would, and I went up to do shoulder presses, which is standard. Yeah. And this was for a photo shoot. I was 3 weeks out, and next thing you know, when I kicked it up, my bicep and detached from my shoulder, which I didn't realize. I thought I just drained something. So I threw them down, and I said, it kind of stung a little bit. And I went back to go doing the photo shoot because this is
a complete severing of the tendon.
Yeah, it detached, and I noticed some swelling the next couple of days, and I just rolled with it. I was Mr. Olympia at the time, and showed up on stage. And of course, by that time, once I drained the water out and on the tan and everything, and put some oil, you could see that there was a bump, but it was detached and it was swollen. So that didn't help. Besides, Phil Heath was phenomenal that day, and he deservingly should have won. Probably would have been hard for me to retain that title with the way he looked. That was probably the best look he ever second at that contest, and then I never won after that.
More after that.
He did.
And I interviewed 3 of those. That's awesome. Let me ask you, pain tolerance. This is something I haven't really heard you talk about. I think like you've do your whole life playing football. Obviously, for most of us, if we have a detached tendon in our bicep, we're done for weeks. We're not going to the hospital. You didn't even notice it. Do you think that all of this has caused it, or just genetically in a situation? Because a lot of guys are football players. Like Ray Lewis probably has a much higher pain tolerance than most people. Do you think this is something? Just something over time? I
think it's mind over matter. At the same time, like we tend to push, right? Because we push ourselves to the zone every time we train. Like, for someone that trains, so someone that doesn't, they don't understand. Like when you go in the gym, like to the point where it's painful, right? Yeah. So so much that that's enough. So you have to have that balance. And for me, I think with the muscle, it's much that was I ever was. I was 5% and I wasn't aware that how serious the injury was, but I also think except where it rolls from the bottom, from the portion, it's a little different of a tear. Although I did surgery 4-5. Funny thing is I couldn't have surgery contest because I had appearances. I was guest posing, so what we do in the off season, we booked I couldn't cancel. I didn't want to be in a sling or anything, so I just February. So I tore it in September. And I had the surgery in February of the next year. And then, of course, I sat out that Olympia. Phil Heath won his second. And then I came back in 2013. I finished sixth, for his third victory.
Well, let's go back to the beginning. You finished second to last the first time you did Olympia.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I also think is incredible is the idea of the times that you were going up against Ronnie Coleman and then beating him. And you mentioned going from, I think you went 15th to 8th to 2nd.
Yeah, 15th to 8th to 2nd. And by the time I got to the second, place at, to Ronnie Coleman for the first time, that was 2001. It was after 9/11 happened, so we weren't even sure. And the first year, it was in Las Vegas, was the first year I got second to last.
And this is the year you moved to Las Vegas too, right?
So the first year that Mandalay Bay was 99.
Okay.
And then in 2000, I got 8th at Mandalay Bay, and then I second in 2001. But they weren't sure if the show was going to happen because Vegas was on a huge alert because of terrorist stuff. So we ended up there, and then, of course, I moved the next year to Las Vegas, 2002. I came after 9/11. I came out here actually as a real estate investor. I didn't come here just because the Olympia was here. I saw the opportunity. I was living in California time. I had migrated from California to be closer to Joe Weider's magazine's Flex Muscle. At the time, that was our only publicity. Mm-hmm. So I was able to shoot year-round with the books, living in Orange County, and I came out here just on a whim to visit. And I was, at the time, looking at property in California, over $1 million for a house. I currently had a condo at that time, and I saw this beautiful home in Summerlin, and Summerlin was this master community, and I saw the opportunity. So, that's where it kind of all started. And then I took, 2002 in the Olympia. I won the Arnold that year. I won 3 Arnolds in a row and won, that was the second biggest prize. I won Hummer trucks and Rolex watches. Then I just started flipping real estate with all sorts of stuff.
One of my Longhorn brethren, Mark, he won.
The first year?
Yeah. I used to bump into him in the archery when I was going to. I was a monster. That guy, very, very individual. So can you talk about this? So I guess from my standpoint, makes Joe Weider decide I want Jay Cutler as an out. What is the?
Well, Joe's like the ride monster. So I was reading him, muscle, and he owned pretty much just End Up Shape magazine. I got the chance to meet Joe Weider for the first time out to a local contest because I wanted so. So I said, you know what, I want to go out to California. I want to be closer to the bear. If I do well, I can get some publicity. And maybe I realized at this point I had started like a small and 8x10 photos and stuff like that. So I was trying to build, my reputation in the bodybuilding. So I flew out to California to compete in this show, Tournament of Champions. This was 1995. And I, had all these magazine shoots lined up. And I remember someone had touched base with Joe Weider, and they said, if he wins the contest, I'll put him on the cover of Muscle and Fitness. And at the time, Muscle and Fitness was like, if you were on the cover of Muscle and Fitness, like you won the lottery, right? Because you were on every shopping store, news aisle, everything. So I won the show, and I had the opportunity to meet Joe like midway through the week after. I remember walking in his office for the first time, and he looked at me, and at the time I was like, he just was like, I want to sign you, I want to put you in a magazine cover. And I said, okay, so we shot my first Muscle and Fitness. I landed that I was 22 years old. And next thing you know, he was kind of asking me, hey, come to California. I
Right.
could utilize you more. And basically he took me under his wing to promote me, and he got me to move to California when I was 25. I was
Yeah.
25.
Well, speaking of life, when you were 16,
16.
how old were you when you got married?
I was 24 in Las Vegas, which was crazy.
Really?
Yeah.
Where was
At the
this?
Rio. Yeah.
Nice. So I know a lot of guys, they do get married early because that whole part of their settled and they understand.
Yeah. We were told on our first date when we were 16, I want to be a bodybuilder. And it was kind of funny because I didn't start till 2 years later. And, you always need some, she was always there. And we were trying, she, big back, a lot of nights in the home, sleeping, that's pretty much the lower bodybuilder.
Right.
It's not what a boxy life, but can't really do. Well, social life is
Because
pretty much nothing.
Because you can't miss. And you kiss
Cows and I was training twice a day, in the morning, in the afternoon, doing 2 body parts a day. You're on a rigorous schedule. I mean, every morning at 6, and I was in bed. Yeah, I got 8 to 10 hours of sleep, but full.
you get. That's what is that like? Oh, because you don't win until 6, so you for more 5 more finish second of those times. Is
The
it
same.
the same? Now what is that like? Because that's a get to second, right? And now here's the situation, and you feel like you're beating your head. This mindset, like,
when I got second, I moved up from almost last to halfway through the pack.
Yeah.
There's only like 16 guys that ever qualified. When I was almost dead last, and then the next year I moved up halfway to 8th, and then to move to second, all of a sudden you're like, okay, you're in that final call, but like I'm against Ronnie Coleman,
Yeah.
who was, like I mentioned, an idol of mine. Like I read about Ronnie Coleman in the books, and I mean, even my first pro victory in 2000, I won the Night of Champions. He called me and told me, hey, congratulations, before the show ended, and I won. And I always had a lot of respect for him. So when I was able to stand on stage with him, and finish second, I was like, man, like I'm this close.
yeah,
And on the big stage too, I was in, we were at Mandalay Bay. I mean, it was the place. I mean, the show was in Vegas, and I realized then, wow, I can actually do this.
At this point, you're making an income from appearances. Like what is the majority endorsements? The majority. I always wondered the income for a bodybuilder at this point. How far down the line are you? Is the guy making 8th? Is this his full-time career, or is he working a second job? Is the guy in 10th place? Like how far down are we doing this before?
It was a bit individual because everyone had different ability to be in condition at certain times of the year. I mean, listen, I was able to move to California. Joe Weider moved me there to be like the guy in the book. So obviously they were utilizing me a lot more than they might be utilizing a guy that lives in New York or Florida. I mean, I came there specifically. So my income was pretty substantial. But now, of course, I'm in the money too, right? The prize money. I mean, at that time it was only $60,000 for second place.
Just for people to understand, I think it's around 400,000.
It's 400 for first,
yeah.
So, I mean, even at my peak, I mean, my best year winning Olympia, I won 200,000. But the prize money wasn't really. It was in the endorsements, the appearances, the merchandising, and it wasn't just like one contract. Like you could have. I mean, I had 14 paid endorsements at my peak. So I was like the guy, and that's what the magazines really did for me because the publicity was worldwide. And that's the thing about bodybuilding is, like, people think, oh, is it recognizable? But overseas we're like rock stars.
Right. A little more like track athletes, how they're more
it's
popular over
crazy.
there.
You don't have the mainstream that's there, right?
Yeah.
It's like bodybuilding, and they have cricket and soccer, right?
Yeah.
What they call football, but it's just they don't have as the basketball and football and all that. American football.
Yeah, that part's pretty crazy. So how many guys do you think are making a living at one time? Because it feels like, I mean, there might be like 20 or 30 guys, but or is it hundreds of guys?
There was quite a few at that time. I mean, Joe Eater had a whole roster.
Okay.
And
the reason why I'm asking is because only 16 guys make Olympia. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, so top 10 of those guys probably are making a decent living.
Yeah.
But that decent living in today's standards, remember, this is over 20
yeah,
years
for
ago,
sure.
pretty much. It's not that, I mean, a couple $100,000 if if you're making a good salary, and back then
but
that
to
was
do what
pretty
you
decent
love.
money. Yeah, I
to
mean,
do what
you were
love.
paid to lift weights.
Yeah.
So I never looked at it as like, listen, honestly, if I could afford the gym membership and the food and afford an apartment and a crappy car, I was okay with it. That was a crazy thing because I just love to train.
That must be an amazing feeling, getting paid really well to do something. Like when you see, Pat Mahomes getting $500 million to play football, which clearly he loves to do, or an NBA player, first time Michael Jordan was getting $35 million a year for the Bulls. And this is 20 years ago, 25 years ago, he's getting $35 million a year to play for the Bulls. When you think about that, the transition to that must be a pretty incredible feeling.
Yeah, but it was just like a bonus for me because I never expected to make that kind of money. And, people look at me now as like, oh, Jay's one of the more successful, if not the most successful guy that bodybuilding has brought forward. But I never really thought about the money. And anytime I went to the gym, I remember winning Olympias and being like, oh yeah, I have this check for, $150 or $200 also.
You forgot to cash
it.
You
don't, it's just, you just don't, you don't think about, you don't do it for the money. You don't do it for the notoriety. You do it because like you work your ass off and it's like, okay, what is the benefit of this?
Yeah.
I remember people would see me in the gym and they're like, man, like, what do you get out of this?
Yeah.
But when you're just driven and you start at 18 and your dream is to reach the pinnacle of what you do, like to be the best in the world at something, my dad used to be like, man, I can't believe the work ethic you have.
Yeah.
And he got disappointed because I would be second, and I remember the first year that I won, 2006, he was there and he's like, call me from Massachusetts. He's like, listen, I'm coming out, but are you going to win this year or what?
Really?
Yeah.
Your dad saying that?
Yeah, because it got old, man. 4 times in a row, I got second to Coleman, and I said, this is the year. This is the year I'm going to win it. And I kind of knew I was going to.
Yeah.
And, and he was going for record 9 at the time, right?
Yeah.
Ronnie was a beast. He won 8 in a row. I mean, tied record with Lee Haney. That's the most ever.
Yeah.
And, so it gets frustrating, but at the same time, it's like, man, how many people can say they're the best in the world at something? Like, there's no, like this.
Jay, how many people can say they're second best in the world at something?
But, listen, we can talk about who's the greatest basketball player. It's still like, is it LeBron or is it,
Michael Jordan?
Michael Jordan. I mean, I don't know. I mean, people now say, okay, LeBron's got the stats, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he just broke all these records, but he's played a lot longer, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Gavin actually wanted me to ask you about your Jordans. You like the basketball shoes?
Yeah, I wear a lot of ones. Yeah.
Yeah? You have
a lot of people follow me for my shoe collection, actually.
Yeah, so tell me about your shoe collection.
I don't even collect them. I wear them. That's a crazy thing. But I have a whole closet. Like I have 4 walls. And Angie, it's my fiance. She's got a little section.
Yeah.
For her shoes, and it's like, here's all my Jordan ones.
Do you prefer weight training in Jordans, or is there a certain type of shoe?
No, I actually have a shoe endorsement with a shoe company called Atomic. So it's more of a workout shoe. So I don't know if you've seen like the shoes that have a very small sole on it.
Yeah.
So you can you see a lot of people training barefoot now when they train legs and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So these shoes they allow you to feel the weight a little more. And those are the kind of shoes I actually train in. But, when I wear the Jordan ones in the gym, which I do from time to time, I get a lot of the social media people yelling at me saying, don't crease the J's.
Yeah, don't crease the
J's.
I've been lifting in basketball shoes my whole life because I mix in basketball for cardio.
Yeah.
I can't stand straight line cardio. I have to go run up and down on the court having a basketball or football in my hand makes the cardio running routes makes it so much easier to do cardio. Just being on a treadmill. What kind of cardio do you do? You talk about you have to do you'll have one cardio session. Is it just a treadmill?
I do everything. So I walk outside.
Okay.
I have a step mill at my house. I have a treadmill, elliptical, bike, sit down bike. I have it all pretty much. I don't do like rowing or anything, but preferably for bodybuilding contests, believe it or not, the stairs were the best thing. The rotating stairs, because you're working more of your backside, your glutes and hamstrings, that tie-in, and that's so important these days.
Yeah.
If you asked any of the top Olympia champions to this era, including Phil Heath, Ronnie, myself, and probably Big Ramy, all these guys, we did a lot of stairs.
Okay. For
conditioning.
For a certain cardio workout, what are your goals for a certain cardio workout? How many calories?
I don't necessarily have a calorie set or a heart rate. It's basically on a time schedule.
Okay.
So for Mr. Olympia, most of us do 2 sessions a day. So we usually do fast in the morning. I think the ideal time to do your cardio is first thing in the morning, empty stomach.
Okay.
Or after the weight training session, or at night,
Yeah.
like before you go to bed or whatever, just to increase your metabolism. That's the whole goal of cardio. It's not like, I know you can get on the machines and you can say, I burned 500 calories.
Yeah.
Ideally, what you want to do is you want to continue to boost your metabolism. So that's why you do these consistent workouts. And I mentioned also I train several times in a day where I'm hitting the metabolism. That way I can, maintain the eating capacity, but also I can, keep body fat as lean as possible and put on muscle tissue at the same time.
Has your belief, your strategy with regard to reps changed through your career? I've heard you say heavy weights is how you build muscle, and you go around 8 to 12. What reps has that changed over time?
Yeah, and that's a pretty broad range. Like you mentioned, 8 to 12. And I think for bodybuilding, I mean, you hear power trainers do like 1, 2, 3 reps. Mm-hmm. Bodybuilding is more of a 8 to 12 repetition, and that means like, I don't go much below 8, but my maximum is usually 12. Not to say I don't go to 15 or 20 reps sometimes.
Yeah.
But my sweet spot, if you watched me train even now, is around 10 repetitions. And why?
How many sets are we talking?
I would do 20 sets per body part. So I would pick like 5 or 6 different movements to hit from different angles. And I was a high volume trainer.
Yeah.
I think ideally, if I was to say, okay, Mike, you want to work out, I would focus on 9 total sets. So if you're going to do chest, I'd say do, bench press, a fly movement, and then like some sort of like a pec deck or something like that.
So
3 sets each.
So these are 9, 3 sets each of the 9. So we're talking 27 sets total.
But I do about 20 total. So I do 3 sets per exercise.
Okay.
So I would do like
3 sets of 12 per exercise.
Yeah.
Okay, because I didn't understand the 20 sets part of it. That part's crazy.
So I would do at least 3 or 4 sets per X. So if you're going to do a flat bench, I would do it for 3 or 4 sets of 12 reps.
Yeah.
Then I would move to like an incline press, do the same, and then kind of switch it around depending on the day. And people like to switch the routine, but truthfully, I don't really switch up what I do.
Yeah.
Because after 20, 30 years of doing this, you know what kind of works, right?
Yeah.
You're kind of limited, especially the people that train at home because of pandemic or whatever else. Your gym is only so equipped, right? So whether it's dumbbells, barbells, cables, now you have a lot of machines that mimic a lot of those things. I didn't have that in the beginning, so I was a free weight pusher. It was really just kind of whatever worked the best for me. And to this day, I still train with a lot of free weights. I don't have any injuries that hinder that or any aches and pains, which is crazy.
You did mention once about an injury to the shoulder. Was this from shot?
Bicep, yeah.
Yeah. No. There's another one that you had with the shoulder. What was
that was
from?
an injection I had, which obviously with performance enhancing, it's necessary at the Olympia level. So I did get an infection, and I competed. That week, but I had obviously retention, water retention.
This is an abscess from like an air bubble, or like what is it?
No, it's just abscess from like just a bad shot. So like it just didn't sit well in the muscle, it got infected, and next thing you know, I was had to take antibiotics.
Is that the only time you've ever had that happen?
Yeah.
Okay, because that's something I've been worried about. I recently started on TRT about 2 years ago, and that's always something, because Vegas Dave was on here and he thought he almost had an abscess get to one of his arteries, and he would have had to lose his leg, and that's always something I've been
and sometimes it's like, okay, what are you taking that does that? But unfortunately, it was a thing called Winstrol, which is a water based compared to like oil is like testosterone or whatever else. So when when I was taking that water-based, it's very prone for infections, but it also it helps with, cutting up the last few weeks.
Sure.
I mean, that's why a lot of guys would use a substance like that.
So just to bridge to that, you did an interview with Greg Doucette, and you were very transparent about the cycles you did before and the cycles that you did in the off season. My first question is, so first of all, I think it's incredibly useful that you did that. I think it's beneficial to a lot of people that you came out and talked about this, because there's a lot of unhealthy abuse when it comes to this kind of stuff. And you and Greg were both mentioning there are guys who are just not even competing, taking more than you guys were ever taking, because they think the more gear I take, the more results I'll get, the bigger I'll get. And so I think it's interesting. You mentioned before at one point, I think the thing that was the craziest. So first off, you mentioned taking insulin and then stopping at 2014. I'm curious, when you're taking something, you're like, I need to stop doing this. What was the sign that you got? I need it, because you also mentioned clenbuterol. You took that for a while and then you didn't like it. What are the signs that make you stop taking something?
It's a trial and error type thing. There's no one that has the exact recipe to become the best at what you do, or we all try to push limitations. And listen, it's choice, right?
Yeah.
So, in no way do I condone like this is what you should do.
Right.
I just, I did a lot of trial and error, just like I did with the training and the foods I ate. And I mentioned, we all reached for certain levels, right? So there was only so much you could do without, with just straight, steroids in your protocol.
Yeah.
And then of course it leads to growth hormone, which, became popular. And then insulin, which you mentioned, I did use some insulin on and off from basically 2001 to 2000. I stopped in 04.
In 04, sorry.
And then I won the Olympia in 06. So it just shows that, I did use it. I did try it. I did not like what it necessarily did to the skin layer, meaning like I thought it thickened the skin a little bit.
Got it. Okay. So I was wondering, what's the physiological reaction?
Yeah. So I think I think you can put on a lot of size, and listen, it's a very complicated thing. People that take insulin, because obviously you have to have food around it, and you have to be smart about your blood sugar.
Yeah.
Right? You have to test your blood sugar, but in all this time I was watched over by some sort of doctor supervision, or someone that definitely knew more than I did. Not to say that I didn't abuse. Like I was very transparent, where I felt like anything over a TRT dose is abusing, right?
Yeah.
But there's certain things that just protocols that work.
Sure.
And it's just like now with the doctor's supervision, like so much testosterone, it seems to be like, I hear so many people say HRT is done like a cc of testosterone a week, right? Or they use like a cream, or But everyone needs different dosages.
I don't think there's a doctor prescribing a full cc, is there? Or like, full.
It depends on what your levels are.
Okay.
So everyone is individual. Like there's times where
I'm talking about 1,000 milligrams. Sorry.
No, like a cc would be 200 milligrams.
Okay, got it. I'm sorry.
I don't know.
My conversion is incorrect.
So you have to be. That's why the blood tests are important.
Yeah.
And, I was just one of these guys. I mean, I just learned as it went. And I mean, that's why I talk about with Schwarzenegger's time, like back then, they didn't have the drugs that are available today, or we did have. Like, I can tell you, we had better drugs then than today.
Yeah. You think they're better because today they're made? You mentioned before they're made in somebody's basement.
Not all, but it's very hard to tell what's real.
Right.
The internet has changed that game a lot. Where it's very easy for someone to say, I took this and it was amazing. Everyone's a salesman, right?
Yeah.
Everyone has the next best thing. So that's why I always say, you should consult with a doctor.
Correct. Yeah.
And unfortunately, if you're under 25, it's going to be hard for you to go to your doctor and say, hey, I need testosterone.
Right.
Your levels should be, my levels were normal until my early 30s. I could come on and off steroids pretty easily and not have any kind of side effects, and people to this day, they refuse to even do that.
Coming off at all.
They have this called bridging, where they stay on therapy, which that wasn't the case with many of us.
Well, here's the thing. When you're talking about training versus hypergonadism, for somebody who has hypergonadism, you would recommend they stay on or come off completely?
They would, you know, but remember, that's the doctor.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to come down to what your testosterone levels are and what you're able to, and listen, there's people that have taken testosterone therapy and come off and their body goes back to normal.
Yes.
Like the whole goal is to really get your body firing again. That's
Yeah.
what they have HCG for that or whatever else. But the problem is when you cycle on and off for years on end, it's almost going to be impossible for your body to kick back in.
Right.
And that was something that I had to be aware of when I first started, right? You know, around 20 years old or whatever, that I just not going to be able to, you know, I would have maybe that predicament.
Yeah.
And, you know, to this day, like I'm a healthy guy. I've never had, you know, any kind of blood work that was way off. I mean, liver enzymes were elevated. I never had high blood pressure. You know, my kidneys, everything was fine.
Yeah.
You know, I've never had those kind of issues that would scare me to the point where I need to stop doing this, right?
You mentioned probably the one that blew me away the most is at one point you were taking 12 IUs of growth a day, and you said you moved that down to 9. My first question is, where do you put 12 IUs of growth a day? You have a second refrigerator?
Well, no, it comes in a vial, right?
Yeah.
So usually it comes in a mixture of like 18. So what I would basically do is take, you know, little bits and pieces through the day.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, that's
you're
how you
injecting these.
Yeah, just in your stomach. You
wow,
know,
man.
it's just in between the skin. So it's a little insulin needle, and you know, like I mentioned, I've gone up to those dosage, but the sweet spot was around 9.
Yeah.
I don't know what a doctor really would recommend. I mean, 1, 2, 3, 4.
That's what I've heard. Yeah.
I mean, you know, guys taking, I'm sure,
for
that
sure.
much. You know what
I mean? I live in Las Vegas. I'm the last guy on TRT, just in case you didn't know. I am the last guy left. If I get any bigger, they're going to hire me at Wet Republic. So just out of curiosity, so you're taking this, but you said that was probably the least. If you could go back in time, that was probably the least effective thing. Was the growth?
You know, I got a lot of flack a little bit for that.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of feedback because, you know, it's easy for me to sit here and say, you know, the people look at, well, he won the Mr. Olympia, so how did it not work, right? But if I looked at the physique transformation, it was progressively, like I mentioned, I was 270 at 20.
Yeah.
And I mean, at that point, you know, I was taking, you know, a cc of testosterone a week.
Yeah.
So I mentioned I went to 300 pounds, but, you know, I mentioned insulin, I mentioned GH and all, but I think progression in the food and everything else, I would have got there. But I feel like for the money that you spend on something like that, because it is expensive.
Yes. The HGH, specifically for the audience, the HGH specifically is expensive. Like testosterone, synthetic testosterone, I believe, is made out of wild yams. It's very easy to produce. The HGH is very expensive.
Yeah, so, you know, back in certain eras, like it can become more or less expensive.
Yeah.
So I think people have this expectations. I hear too many people say, I was on GH and I was able to eat pizzas and burgers and I was still getting ripped.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't happen like that. So I think for people's knowledge, like if you're going to transition to that, you know, don't expect like this huge transformation. Everything comes down to, I still go back to the nutrition, the sleep patterns, and how you train.
Talking to guys about anabolics, it is the most confusing shit I have ever heard. You even mentioned about some people with the peptides. You don't even like. I can't even understand what half of this stuff is. Can you explain? So you mentioned you really liked equipoise. What was? So the only two things I hear people agree on is Anavar is okay and take a lot of testosterone. That's the only two things. Everything else, I know some people will not take estrogen blockers. I know some people who don't like HCG because it gives you acne or whatever, or changes your mood or whatever. The only two things I hear are Anavar and pretty much ubiquitous is testosterone and Anavar. What you said you like equipoise? There was stuff you didn't like. What caused that?
Equipoise is a red blood cell volumizer. So you want more increased red blood cells, just like you hear of this
well, test does that also, right?
Yeah, but Anadrol 50 also is like a gainer's pill, right? So what you want as a bodybuilder is obviously the volumization, so you get the muscle fullness.
Yeah.
And equipoise was used for horses.
Yeah.
So the actual
equipoise. Nah, my bad. Sorry.
Equipoise was, so we used to get these bigger bottles, and they were actually for veterinarian for the horses, and that's it also helped increase my appetite, and that's what I preferred at the time. I mean, the thing is with Anavar, like it's very safe even for the women. Somewhat, they tend to use that, although I don't agree with it. It's just less potent, so it usually comes in an oral form, but it's not as hard on your liver and your kidneys and everything else. So that's why people say, "Oh, Anavar," it's just popular, right? I think they prescribe that also. A lot of the doctors, they're not giving out prescription on equipoise,
right?
And
of course,
trenbolone
or masterone, or
that's kind of like
what
we call exotics.
What is the line of delineation? Why is that I can get some doctors that give me Anavar, but I can't get Trem? What is the?
I think it's just controlled. They have
FDA,
advanced studies,
FDA stuff
on how these things perform, and I'm scared. Like I said, trenbolone is a scary thing. It's you hear about I'm on Tren and it makes you aggressive, and
bro,
it's very hard.
I've seen
your hair on it.
Yes.
So for me, like I mentioned in that interview, which I also got a lot of flack for, is like I didn't really fuck with Tren much. I was basically what they called Parabone, and people say, well, it's the same thing. No, it isn't. It's not the same. What I was getting was totally different. It was a light dose compared to what these guys use for dosage in the trenbolone world. And trenbolone is like, hey, you want to get aggressive, you want to get mean, you want to get ripped. Like that's what seems to be what people are using now. But I always tend to try to steer people away from it.
If I gave you some power at the FDA, what things would you change? Would you make things more strict, less strict? What would you do different?
I mean, I think it's a good
the way it is now.
I really think testosterone is sufficient enough.
Yeah.
It's just that people's dosages go extreme.
Yes.
And I mentioned 500 mgs was like a normal cycle for me, but I know guys that have done 5,000.
That's crazy. It's crazy.
So, you say a cc, so you figure each syringe is 3 cc's, so that would be, that's 600 milligrams. So do the math. I mean, it'd be like almost 10 of those filled, that you'd have to take in a week's time.
That's crazy. Because I remember, so just for people who don't know, because there's a lot of confusion. There's probably over 10 million men on HRT now in the U.S., and a lot of people are confused when they hear test and then they think steroids. They think they're the same thing. They don't understand the difference. So I like to use the example of scurvy. Back in the 1850s, you'd have sailors and they'd have vitamin C deficiency and they'd be dying from vitamin C deficiency. When you don't have vitamin C is a miracle cure. And when you are 32 years old and your free test is in the 200s, testosterone is now a miracle cure. And I was going to wait to the end to talk about this, but you mentioned before about going to like an HRT doctor versus a urologist. You said like a regular doctor or whatever. I've actually had clients, overweight, like high pitched voice, no drive for anything. Go to urologist. Urologist said, well, yeah, you're 35, your test is 215. You're good. Your prostate's not swollen. You're good. And I'm like, why didn't you look at him and be like, I want to fuck my wife once in a while? Like, you know how many men? There's an epidemic of men over the age of 50 committing suicide. And when I hear that, I'm like, how is this urologist okay with this guy being at 200? What do you think about that?
You know what? Everyone has the different levels that they think are okay.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned, the last blood test I had, I was around 600, and my sweet spot would be 800.
Okay.
And you'd have some doctors that say, hey, that's too high. And then others that allow you to be over 1,000. I think 300 is like where they have that, okay, this is a normal level. But the truth is, and I think studies show that most guys over 35, their testosterone levels drop. And it really comes down to your diet, stress levels, everything, right? Genetics. So I think it's really important for anyone to go to have their free testosterone checked.
Yes.
Listen, everyone should be getting blood work at least once a year, at least. I choose twice a year. Do your checkups, your physicals, and, have these levels checked. I mean, have everything checked. I mean, in this day and age, I think as you get a little older, especially someone like me, I mean, your biggest fear is like you're watching some of your friends pass away at your young ages, consider young. I would definitely, be a little more,
careful about
it. Yeah.
Can we talk about that? Dallas McCarver, John Meadows, Sean Roden. What do you think is is it a function of just abuse, or is what do you think is going on with some of these guys dying? And by the way, professional wrestlers too. Like, this is another situation. What do you think is going on with the mortality with some of these things?
I think a lot of fingers have been pointed at these guys. I mean, I think it's been known that the autopsy with Dallas McCarver, he had a genetic problem with his heart. With John Meadows, the same thing. Sean Roden, I don't know what his autopsy was even with that. I mean, he was 46, I think.
Yeah.
You just have these instances, man, where it's like people just, unfortunately pass at certain, younger ages. And I know people want to pinpoint, it's the steroids or the lifestyle, right? But I can't necessarily speak on that, because listen, I was a guy that pushed levels through I'm 48 now.
You mentioned before, when you were in your 20s, you'd give up your life at past 40 to win Mr. Olympia, and now obviously you've changed.
Which is so insane to me, but you hear this all the time, and I used to hear this with Olympic sports, and they said, if I had to give up, a portion of my life to win the gold medal, would you do it? And I think in your early 20s, we think that's normal, right? But as you get older, you realize that your time is the most important thing. So for me, I was that thinker, because I was so determined to be the best at what I did. And then I get there and I was like, wow, there's so much life ahead of me.
Yeah.
And that's a scary thing.
So I think it's really important that you, of all people, express this. And I'm curious what made you, because you are a little bit more forthright in the Greg Doucette interview than I think you've been before, certainly while you were competing. What was the catalyst for you to decide? Or was it just a spur of the moment thing? Hey, man, I'm just going to talk about how much test I was taking for the first time. What was that about?
It's been kind of like one of those things where people don't necessarily come straight out and ask you.
Yeah.
And as an athlete in the bodybuilding realm, a lot of our, like I mentioned, income comes from endorsements, and you're branded, and a lot of that was around nutritional products. So we endorse a lot of products, and for us, we do advertisements like, hey, this is what works, right? To this day, I mean, I own a supplement brand, Cutler Nutrition, and I have my pre-workout powders, my proteins, all that stuff is supplemented in with a great diet, but it's not the go-to answer. But I feel like since that interview, a lot of more respect has come forward to me, because no one at my level really goes forward and talks about, the ins and outs and really opinions on what worked and what didn't work. And I think, you still have these people that question, well, was it really what he said? Because he was so successful at what he did.
Right.
And he's able to live on the other side now, so successful.
This is why I brought up benching 315. As a teenage kid without lifting any weights. The genetic part of it added on with whatever you were taking.
Let's put it this way, like when I graduated high school and became, the best bodybuilder in the world several years later, I don't think anyone in high school was surprised.
Right.
Because I was always that guy. I mean, even in my high school yearbook, I mentioned I didn't necessarily lift weights, but it was like no pain, no gain was like one of my quotes in there. And I told you I was flexing at 4 and 7 and 12, and I always had a great physique. So I think I was destined to be a bodybuilder. Now, I didn't realize what it took to get there. Number one, the diet. I didn't realize the drugs. I didn't realize the time, the effort, the consistency with the training. Like, I can sit here and say, without hard work and a tunnel vision and a hell of a mental ability, you can't be the best at anything that you do. And I think that's really... There's a lot of tools to get to a certain levels, right? And we're not one of these sports that necessarily is a drug tested.
Yeah. You mentioned 1 year because of the baseball shit that you had been drug tested.
They did drug tests.
How did that work out, by the way? What was that meeting like?
Never got the results. Just backstage, and I said, hey, you gotta pee in this container, and I had no issue with it because I honestly wasn't on any drugs.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, what is this for? And they're like, just do it,
Yeah, that's crazy.
It's kind of like a protection thing, but we're not sanctioned in like the Olympics, and,
right?
And we didn't have like a union. So for us, it's like we were a cult, kind of a cult sport. So it was only covered by books. Like, I mean, for a couple years on pay-per-view, but no one was really the big sponsors weren't in there,
Right.
like Coca-Colas or anything like that. So it's like, it's kind of kind of a hidden thing. So we didn't have to abide by a certain rules, right? We test us for diuretics, which were dangerous at the time, right? Sucking the water down. I mean, you probably know guys that take diuretics for pool parties.
Yes,
and stuff,
absolutely,
right?
yeah.
So that was really, they drug tested for that for a while, but that's not something that they do today.
Yeah, man. I say it again. If you have any doubt about this, I think it was so beneficial for a lot of people for you to do it. And as far as it being a secret, it's not a secret. I mean, obviously, nobody ever thought, even in his book, Schwarzenegger talks about taking steroids. So I don't think that was the issue. What do you think, though, when The Rock or Michael Hearn say that they're all natural? What does that, do you have any feeling about that?
Those things I don't really comment as much on because
Yeah.
I understand the positioning of, like, everyone has their own position, and if they choose not to talk about it, I respect that. Because for a long time I did the same, right? I didn't come out and say I take this or that, and I kind of went into interviews knowing that many weren't going to ask, and the ones that I thought might, I was protected. Where, hey, don't blatantly ask me, hey, do you take this or that? Like, don't put me on the spot. And that's why, I was limited on where I put my publicity. And all the local news stations before the Olympiad covered the event, but they didn't touch on that.
Yeah.
And I think it was kind of known, like, hey, don't ask these kind of questions.
Right.
But, you have to prepare yourself into this. I mean, even walking in here today, like, I'm an open book with a lot of things I do. And I want people to realize that, like, I'm an honest person,
For
right?
sure.
And you have your ins and outs on how you get to certain levels of what you do in your own field. And I hate to harp on the chemical side because the food is, like I mentioned, and the training was just, I mean, we can touch small, but I reminisce now 30 years of, like, thinking, man, is it ever going to happen? And when you win that title, it's just like you have a flash of, like, all the things that happened in order to get there. And here you are, the best in the world at what you do. And to this day, I'm living as, like, he was the greatest bodybuilder for 4 years and second for 6, right? So it's pretty crazy.
To me, the food is still mind-blowing. That part, like, I don't care what you're taking. That I'm not eating 140 pounds of chicken. That's that to me. Like, people, I think, lose that part of it. And then, like I said before, naturally having big legs, playing defensive tackle. I think all of these things sort of play into it, and people confuse it for, say, I just take person X and I stick chemical B into them, and then they get big, and that just isn't how it works.
Yeah, and the disappointing, I'll tell you the most disappointing part about what I did for a living. I don't enjoy food to this day. Like, if you called me and said, Jay, there's this wonderful restaurant opening in Las Vegas, like, we see it all the time, right? And you say, what do you eat when you go out? And I don't want to have steak. Like, I'm not a big steak eater at 48 now. I tend to eat some sushi, but I'm limited even on that, just because I know, like, a lot of sushi rice has a ton of sugar.
Yeah.
And, I might eat just some plain fish or whatever else. But there's nothing that excites me. There's no food. Oh, does mom cook her special meal when I go back home, or nothing?
So 20 eggs a day.
I drink the egg whites now.
still
See, that's
eat,
the difference between back then to now, is they didn't have pasteurized egg whites. So now you can buy the cartons and you can drink them, and it's actually a very good source of protein instead of frying them up. So I was cracking the eggs, flipping the yolk out, throwing it.
Yeah.
And then having the egg whites. So it was a lot of work. I mean, there was some diets, I'm not going to lie, I ate 140 egg whites a day. So I was cracking eggs nonstop. I mean, I remember singing cracking eggs for an hour in the morning, and I would put everything in Tupperware containers, and I would just dump out. I was eating 30 egg whites a meal then, because there's only about 3 grams of protein in an egg white. And I was eating, 500 grams of protein.
That's
a day,
unbelievable, man. So you also mentioned 1,000
grams of carbs.
Grams of carbs, and then 300 to 400 grams of protein per day. That's what you're doing while you were training.
Most of the time, yeah.
Man, so that's crazy. The idea of eating 7 times a day would rob you of the joy of eating. I mean, but it makes sense. It makes sense.
It's crazy though, because I would eat, 6,000 calories a day or whatever. And there's a lot of people that go out in one meal and eat 6,000 calories, right? So we talk about calories versus good and bad.
Yeah.
So when you're actually building and you day in, day out eat every 2 hours, good food to equal that amount with low fat, right? My goal was
Yeah.
to eat as low fat as possible. Even the red meat I ate was just 100, like it was
Yeah.
super, super lean. And when I would diet for contests, I would cut down to whitefish. Like, so if you asked me, I want to get in the best shape of my life, I would go on more of a whitefish diet. I would go moderate to low carbohydrates on certain days, but I feel that you still need every fourth day, you need a big bump in carbohydrates. But I would shift the calories. So we call this zigzag dieting. So basically, calories and a protein and carbohydrate are the same. It's 4 calories per gram.
Yeah.
Where fat is 9 calories per gram. So ideally, you shift the calories around and you body fat, but obviously maintain muscle.
Right.
So my whole goal was to be as I possibly could on Olympia stage, but be as lean. We got down to 3% at 260, 265, 270.
You guys are like chemists and thermodynamicists.
Yeah,
that's what because we're gonna get to. I want to get to the 09 when you come back after losing to Dexter Jackson, because to me, military officer, and the way you guys attack these problems of my back needs to get wider and I need to increase the calorie. These are physics problems. These are geometry problems that you guys are handling, and the way you attack them is just so fascinating to me. So let's talk about this. Let's get to 06. You win the first time. Do you remember which championship they like? The first one is the one they remember the best. What was the what was?
It was amazing.
Yeah.
My dad was happy. That's
Yeah.
for sure. But after to Coleman.